All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another episode of 914 Wired. This is Charlie Stern, and my co hosts are Ardina Seward and Peter Moses. Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi there.
So, we have a very special guest today on 914 Wired. And before I go on too much further, because we got a lot to talk about, this is a whole big thing. If you're here for the first time, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube, click subscribe. If you're downloading the podcast, click follow because that way you get a notification when there's a new episode. So what we're here to talk about today, our guest is the mayor of the Village of Pelham, New York, Chance Mullen. Welcome to the program, Chance.
It's good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
The issue that we're talking about is flood mitigation. And I don't know, I thought a lot about how to tee this up. I'm going to try to do this in a way that does complete justice to the whole topic because there's so much going on with this story.
Yeah.
Ardina and Peter, how many times have we had guests on this show and touched on this topic, right? Lou Young, former CBS television news guy. He's a village board member now in Mamaroneck. It's all he talks about, and he's been on the show several times talking about flood mitigation. We had Ken Jenkins, the deputy county executive. He was talking about flood mitigation. We had, I even think the Congressman Jamal Bowman mentioned it when he was on the show last week.
He did, and we've also had people from the board in Mount Vernon talk about the Eastchester caused flooding.
I forgot about that. There's another potential flooding issue that has to do with
Right.
Lake Isle and that reservoir that they've got up there. There's a major public health and safety concern in the village of Pelham. Why don't you frame it for us, and then we can jump in and add more color with questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you. And it is good to be here to talk about it. It is a health and safety issue. I think you framed it really well. I think if you're somebody who doesn't get flooded or you don't work in municipal government, then you're probably thinking of it as, oh, I know somebody who got flooded really bad during Ida. Or, yeah, my neighbor said they got a foot of water. Or maybe you have, a little bit of a leak in your foundation. What you don't know is, and this is true not just for the village of Pelham, it's all around Westchester. Most of us have old communities where folks never really designed for the kinds of storms that we're seeing now. And so you have old pipes, you have old culverts that were sort of put in 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now you've got some areas that have been getting flooded for a very long time, where now it's become catastrophic, happening every year.
This is a major problem in southern Westchester. In northern Westchester, it's different. It's communities who want to use other communities' wells and want to use other communities' dams, not the dams, the water that they own. That's the northern Westchester issue. Flooding is not such a big problem in northern Westchester, though. It's southern.
January 17, you did a presentation for the Pelham Board of Education. We should emphasize again, you are the mayor of the village of Pelham.
Yep.
You did a presentation January 17th to the Board of Ed. Please explain the intersection of the village and the Board of Ed on this issue. Let's get right into it.
Absolutely. So in October, after about 18 months, we got a plan from our engineers that they had spent a year and a half developing. It would help us resolve flooding village-wide. Now, there are two branches. There's one that runs on one side of town, one that runs on the other. The North Pelham branch is the most complicated one to solve. And basically for both of them, we need bigger pipes. But the North Pelham branch, we also have to build an underground detention tank that can capture some of the water and send it out to the river. So you're going to have an underground detention tank. You're going to have some pumps, basically really big sump pumps on top. that will send the water out to the river. The one part of town, and this is a problem for a lot of folks. The one in that area, there's one parcel of land that is publicly owned and doesn't have a house or business on it, and it's owned by the school district.
Right.
And it is sort of the eastern half of a really cherished playground. So on one side you've got Julianne's playground, and on the other side you have 2 tennis courts and a blacktop. And we want to put it under the tennis courts and the blacktop. So
The storage tanks would go underneath. In other words, there'd be a big construction project. The tanks
yep,
would go in. The tennis courts would get redone. They'd be on top. No one would even know it's there, really.
that's right.
Okay.
So we reached out to the school district as soon as the engineer suggested it. Started that conversation. It's been tough to connect on it. The school district has its challenges. We've got flooding on our plate. And I think for a while it's been difficult to understand the severity of this or how limited our options are. And so I came to the school district to lay it out, to say, here's what you can expect. Here's why we're doing this. The tough thing about a project like this is sometimes you can't get away from politics. And what people don't understand is when some voices in the community try to dominate the conversation with a lot of misinformation, it boxes in even people who may want to do the right thing. It boxes them in, and it makes it very hard for them to find a way to kind of compromise. And I think that's the situation we're in with the school board, where there are some folks who think the school district should not let us do it. And I think the overwhelming majority of folks, and especially those getting flooded, say, why in the world wouldn't you let the village get this project done?
But I think,
Ardina.
Mayor, you're talking about, you're basically talking about an easement.
That's right.
And when you're talking about an easement, it would mean that the village and the school board would become partners in the governance, the whatever happens on that land. So from the school's point of view, one could argue that, well, if something goes wrong, or if those pumps underneath the tennis court need maintenance, it's going to cause a disruption on the tennis court. But on the other hand, the village could argue, well, this is for the good of the whole, because if you don't allow us to do this, then you're looking forward to a whole bunch of people getting flooded. Now, I also read that in lieu of you not being granted the easement, then you'd have to do the other feared E word, which is eminent domain, which is not popular, which is not popular to homeowners, and it's the specter of people losing their property because the school board is holding out is indeed a big political issue. So I've said a lot. I'm going to toss it back to you. Get us through the weeds.
Yeah, so what we're hoping for is that we do an easement agreement, and we would indemnify the school district from all of those potential complications. And in exchange, we would either write a check to the school district, right, for the value of that, or we would use that money to upgrade the rest of the playground. And I have spoken with one Board of Education member recently today, and I'm optimistic that we might be able to start thinking about designs first rather than the legalities, which I think might help bring down the temperature a little bit. So I'm more optimistic than I have been for the last couple of weeks.
So Chance, let me
Yeah.
add to that a little, because I spoke with the president of the Pelham Board of Education to kind of get ready for our interview, and I invited him onto this podcast as well. We'll see how that turns out. So his name is Dr. Michael Owen-Michaane. And Dr. Owen-Michaane said that, and he repeated this a couple of times, he says that he wants the project to be successful. and he wants you to be successful with this project. But he says that the district is open to a transfer, but that they're opposed to an easement. So that's a little bit like saying, I'll take you to lunch, but you got to pay, right? It doesn't help you very much because without the easement, it doesn't do you any good to have a transfer. How do you cooperate with a I don't know what to say. I mean, the questions are pretty obvious here. He said that the school district is the jewel of Pelham, but that anything could happen, and the school district just doesn't want to own the project. So how do you help me make sense of it?
Yeah, just to be clear, even in an easement agreement, the school district wouldn't own the project. So under an easement agreement, the school district would still own the broader land. We would own the stuff and be responsible for the stuff that we put on the land.
But in terms of scope, there are 243 homes in the flood path. That's what I heard
Yeah,
you say.
that's
Think
right.
about that, guys. If there's 4 people living in every house, that's 1,000 people who are being affected by flooding.
Right.
That's right.
There's only 7 or 8,000 people living in the village of Pelham.
And there's only so many firefighters there who help clear the basements of flooding.
And
That's right.
apparently the village of Pelham is buying a boat.
That's right. That's right. We don't live on the coast. We're
Right.
buying a boat to deal with rain. And you know, you figure the last storm, I think it was in September, there was a woman, and there's a story about it. There's a editorial in Pelham Examiner today about someone on I believe 7th Avenue who was trapped in their basement. And the water was up to their chin by the time our firefighters got there, because once the water rises, you can't get the door open.
Right.
This is routine. And now when it rains, there are entire areas where we can't get the fire truck through. We can't get medical personnel to the area that's being impacted.
Well, Chance,
And
just so you know, Chance, Ardina grew up in a floodplain in Mamaroneck, and the very things that you're now experiencing in Pelham, Ardina experienced throughout her
yeah,
childhood.
Yep, yep. And which also I would like to ask you, Mayor. I'd like to get back to the structure of the easement. The easement, I think that the type that you're talking about means that if the school board in the future decided that they wanted to alter the grounds, let's say if they wanted to put up, I don't know, if they want to put up a super slide, if they want to put up a water park or a sprinkler, bad pun, but if they wanted to put something up like that, then they would have to have permission from the village to do it, since the village would hold the easement. Is that correct?
well, if what they wanted to do was going to impact the detention system.
Right, that's what I'm
So
saying.
so the detention system is underground. So I think the point you're asking about is the school board's concern of, if we have to build a building and we know the building is going to have a foundation with footings,
Right.
that's going to, mess up your detention system.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly. Yeah, that is
yeah,
my point. And one
yeah.
other quick question: what about, is it possible, instead of mandating that it be done, is it possible to have a referendum instead of a village mandate?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. So we're open to a transfer as well. There's a little bit of a nuance here, so I'll try to explain it briefly. Um, if they wanted to transfer the property, we're open to that conversation as well. However, what we would want to ensure is that we're not putting flood mitigation on the ballot. So we're in
Okay.
a situation where if we don't use this land, we're tearing down homes, or we're using eminent domain against the school district,
Well, that was my
right?
question. That eminent domain thing could work both ways, right? Because
That's right.
so if the district doesn't want to cooperate and offer an easement, why not just take that little corner of the park that you need for the generator pumps by
Mhm.
eminent domain?
Uh, we need more information before we go down that road, but
Mr.
it
Mayor,
is
Mr.
it
Mayor,
is possible.
what is the motivation for the school board, other than control, for opposing a project that benefits the families, including many students who go to all those schools.
I don't think there's one particular perspective. I think they have I think the school board, I don't know what I don't know, and I do want to be fair to them. Um, I think the school board has folks with lots of different perspectives, and some folks don't want us to do anything to Julianne's because it might hurt the playground. For some folks, it's about future flexibility if they want to build a building. For some folks, it's the pumps. For some folks, you kind of go down the line. And my sense is there may be a majority of members who really want to find a path to yes.
Then they should do that.
But we're
Okay.
we're in that scrum now.
I thought the most compelling thing you said was you said to the board, "You've owned this property for 100 years, and nothing's been built there in 100 years."
That's right.
I waited too long in this interview to bring this up, but there's a major equity angle running right through the center of this issue. So why don't you go ahead and frame that for us?
Thank you for that. This is true around Westchester, but the worst flooding in town happens on 7th Avenue and 6th Avenue. And if you look at the old redlining maps, that happens to be the one part of town that was redlined back in the 30s and 40s.
Right. And you put that map on the screen. That I can show here. I'm going to share that again so that everybody can see what we're talking about here. That map on the right is what you're talking about.
That's right. So the worst flooding in the top right corner, there's a little bit of a red triangle there. That is where the worst flooding in town happens. And a good amount of that is caused by an obstruction that's right at the corner of that triangle, right by Sergio's, for folks who don't know the area.
And where did that map come from, Chance?
That's the University of Richmond. They organize all the different redlining maps all throughout Westchester.
Wow.
So this is a redlining map from 1937.
That's right.
And basically Pelham was segregating black and Italian people in that top right corner.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting when you look at those old maps. They outline, they sort of have a report with the number of black families, the number of Italian families, and then they designate it as, infiltration. And there was
and not water infiltration.
No. It was quote unquote infiltration by blacks and Italians. And so the yellow areas on that map were places that weren't quite redlined, but they were trending. And as we all know, during that period, places that got redlined were denied mortgages, financial loans, services for people to invest in their properties and grow their wealth. But what we also know statistically is if you look around the country at the places that were redlined, they also tend to have some of the worst infrastructure and
It's true.
some of the worst flooding.
Mamaroneck is very similar. There's an area called the Flats, which is, it's been gentrified a little bit, but it's the identical situation. That was always a black Italian stronghold, immigrant Italian, and like clockwork, it would get flooded every year.
And it's the definition of systemic, right?
Yeah.
That even after the thing is technically illegal, you now end up with communities where the parts of town that have a relatively lower median income tend to have challenges that are the most expensive to fix. And naturally, what happens for a lot of political leaders is they say, well, I don't want to spend all this money on the part of town that may be sort of viewed as less valuable, right? Have less valuable assets. I'll spend the money in the places where there's higher assets, higher home values. And that keeps happening, right?
Well, here we are 87 years later, or 84,
That's right.
84 years later, And the village, and I commend you for being behind this and having your village board, which I'm assuming is also behind this, supporting straightening out a long-standing problem, and your opposition is coming from the Board of Education. So there's a pathetic irony there. It's got to get resolved.
And it's interesting because you talk about redlining, and I think a lot of people, it makes a lot of people uncomfortable
Yeah.
the second that you start talking about it. I brought it up in the presentation because I view it as a point of pride for our community to be able to make an investment that rights that kind of a wrong, even though it's so delayed. Like, we would be the generation that did that. And so I see it as a positive thing. Let's do this. It's another thing that we get to fix in addition to flooding, in addition to potentially upgrading the playground and adding some fun things, in addition to showing our community that the village and the school board can work together, across some ideological and probably partisan lines. In addition to all those, we get to right this wrong, which has been around for a very long time.
Are there alternative remedies besides this pump station? Is there another way to mitigate the floods?
There's really not. You're gonna have to put it. You're gonna have to put it somewhere, and it's gonna have to be near the tennis courts. So what we've asked our engineer for is show us a map, right? So that we actually understand. It's going to be a tough map to look at because it's going to have these homes over here will be circled and those homes over there will be circled. But if you don't have that, to put this in context, there's this obstruction that runs down Fifth Avenue. There's a sanitary line, a sewage line, and then the storm drain crosses it. So right now we have a pipe inside of a pipe. And in order to fix flooding, you got to drop one of them. The second you drop it, you got to have a pump station that pumps the water back up to where it needs to go.
Ardina, from what I gleaned watching these recordings, the engineers know how to do this.
They
It's
do.
not. This isn't like bleeding edge science. These problems get straightened out whenever a municipality decides to throw resources at it, get money from the county, get money from the federal government. Chance's team is probably very busy developing the very complicated paperwork. I guess they call them grants necessary to get all. They know what to do, and it's fixable, right? But you got to have the political will to do it. And I think there's it's almost like Chance, you and I are not new to each other. I can't stand school boards, and this is just another example where it's like if you want something not done ever, give it to a school board to solve the problem.
Well, it's true for local governments too. I think the reality is whenever you're talking about flood mitigation, you're talking about putting a whole lot of money into something that's underground, and you don't get to cut a ribbon on it. And it is hard to build the political will.
You could cut a ribbon on this, Chance. You could cut a ribbon on this.
Well, it's a great science project. Let's look at it in a creative way. I mean, if the school could institute a course of flood management, it's a great science project and learning experience for the kids. You never know.
That's true. That's true.
What is the total price tag associated with the proposed resolution?
Yeah, it's somewhat in flux. The first number we got was 39 million. They did some additional work to finalize the conceptual plan. It came down to about 36 million.
Right.
The county has been very supportive. We're talking to them about some money they added to their capital budget that could actually be about 16 million.
Mm-hmm.
So at the same time, we haven't yet designed some of the park upgrades.
Another issue here, though, Chance, that we didn't really get into is this imbalance of the assessments that could result from the devaluation of these properties. I guess I gather that the county now has a rule that says when you sell your house, you have to disclose if there is a flood. And so people are going to march in and they're going to sue for certiorari to lower the valuation of their house because they got flooding problems. It's going to shift the burden over to everybody else who's fortunate enough to have a dry basement.
That's right. And I've already been on some of those emails with people reaching out to the assessor. One particular email that comes to mind where somebody said, "Hey, listen, I get flooding. How do you figure that into my assessment?" And people are going to start asking that, because if you're getting assessed as a $600,000 house, but you know you're not going to sell it for more than 400, why are you paying taxes on a $600,000 house?
Great
I
point.
think there's a headline here that there are houses in Pelham that go for 600 grand. I find that difficult to conceive. Most of Pelham seems much more expensive than that.
A lot of the challenge right now is that there are some voices that are taking up way more space than they deserve, who are trying to make this seem like a controversial thing that's going to cause damage when it's actually just going to benefit the entire.
Okay, now what? Before we leave, what is the motivation for those people?
I'm not a psychiatrist, man. I
Well,
can't tell you that.
but what are they voicing? What is the theory behind opposing it?
I think some of it is a feeling that so you have to understand that the school district covers 2 villages. So I think there are some people who are arguing that because the school district owns land in the village of Pelham, that if that land gets devalued, then technically we're devaluing an asset that's owned by people in the other village. Now, there are very few people who take that position, but that is a very vocal one. And then the other piece of this is just partisanship. We're headed into election season. There's an election happening in the other village. We will soon be having a school board election. People are about to start passing out petitions to get on the ballot for next November here in this village. So some of it is that too. And that's probably the bulk of it, frankly. And then the final piece of opposition, I think, is the most human opposition, let me say it that way, is folks who are around, who live around the park, who just want to make sure that we end up with a design that is suitable to the park.
Yeah.
Because we do love the playground. I taught my kid how to ride his bike on that blacktop. So those folks, I completely get it. And I think we're going to be able to resolve that with just some nicer designs. The other folks, I don't know how to deal with that. I think you just have to make sure that the people who do support the project are a little bit louder, frankly.
Chance, you have an unbelievable disposition. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how the village of Pelham found you, but they're lucky because you have got I don't know if it's the Midwestern upbringing or what it is, but you just have a disposition and a temperament that is extraordinary. And that's why I think you're going to be very, very effective with this and in resolving this. And hopefully it won't take the rest of our lives.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you. Thank you. And let me give a quick shout out to Pelham Examiner, because they've been covering this and they're an online newspaper. They've been fantastic. And right now, if folks want to see the impact that is happening from flooding, there's a string of letters to the editor on pelhamexaminer.com that I think are really, really powerful.
Thank you. I will put a link to that in the show notes as well. Pelham Examiner is a local volunteer newspaper, which increasingly is where local news is coming from in this area.
It's true.
Yes.
It's true.
All right, everybody. That's going to do it for 914 Wired for this week. Our guest has been Mayor Chance Mullen of the Village of Pelham. Thank you again for coming on here, Chance, very much.
Thank you so much, Charlie, Ardina, Peter. Good to see you.
All right,
Thank
Ardina
you.
and Peter will be back next week. Thanks, everybody.